I didn't expect to fall in love in the army. Honestly, I didn't expect to feel anything out there except exhaustion, stress, and the constant pressure to keep it together. But the first time I really noticed Elias, it was because he laughed during something that absolutely wasn't funny, and somehow, that stuck with me more than anything else. It was week 3 of training, and everything still felt like controlled chaos. Early mornings, cold showers, orders being barked nonstop. You didn't really think, you just reacted. That was the whole point. I was standing in formation, half awake, trying not to look as dead as I felt, when one of the guys in our unit completely messed up a drill. The instructor went off, full volume, the kind of yelling that makes your chest vibrate. Nobody moved, nobody dared react. Except Elias. He didn't laugh out loud, he wasn't stupid, but I saw it. That quick smirk, the way he looked down like he was trying to hide it. It was small, barely noticeable, but for some reason, I caught it. And for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Up until then, everyone had just been faces. Names I was trying to memorize, people I had to work with. But Elias stood out after that. Maybe because he seemed a little less robotic than the rest of us. Like he hadn't fully let the place strip him down yet. Later that day, we got paired up for drills. Pure coincidence, or at least that's what I told myself. Harvey, right? He said, adjusting the strap on his gear like it didn't weigh anything. Yeah, I replied, sizing him up a little. Up close, he looked different than I expected. Taller than me by a bit, broad shoulders, but not in an intimidating way. More steady. Calm. His hair was always slightly messy, like he didn't bother fixing it even when he had time. I'm Elias, he added, like I hadn't already heard his name called a dozen times. Yeah, I know. He smirked again. Same one from earlier. That should have been nothing. Just another interaction. But something about it lingered. We started training together, running drills, covering each other during exercises, all that standard stuff. And somewhere in between getting yelled at and trying not to collapse from exhaustion, we started talking. At first, it was basic. Where you're from, why you enlisted, the usual. I needed a reset, Elias said one night while we were cleaning our gear. Felt like I was stuck. I nodded. Same. That was a lie, sort of. I didn't join for a reset. I joined because I didn't know what else to do. But it sounded better his way, so I let it sit. The conversations got easier after that. Natural. Like we'd known each other longer than we actually had. And that's when I started noticing things I probably shouldn't have. The way he'd casually throw an arm over my shoulder after a long day, like it was nothing. The way he'd stand just a little too close when we were going over instructions. The way his voice dropped when it was just the two of us, quieter, more relaxed. I told myself it didn't mean anything. It couldn't mean anything. Places like that don't leave room for confusion. You keep your head straight, you follow the rules, you don't complicate things. But still, I noticed. One night, after a brutal day that felt like it would never end, we were both sitting outside the barracks. It was quiet for once, the kind of quiet that almost feels unnatural after constant noise. Elias leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. You ever think about quitting? I let out a short laugh. Every day. He glanced at me, smiling faintly. Yeah, same. There was a pause after that. Not awkward. Just still. Then he said, But I wouldn't. Not now. Why? He shrugged, but didn't look away this time. Got a reason to stay. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. I didn't ask what he meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Because part of me already had a feeling. And that was the problem. I'd heard stories before, guys getting too close, lines getting blurred, but I always thought I'd be smarter than that. More controlled. But sitting there next to Elias, close enough that our shoulders were touching, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't as in control as I thought. Not even close. And that was just the beginning. The first time things crossed into something I couldn't ignore, it wasn't dramatic. No big moment. No sudden realization. It was just a hand. We were out on a field exercise, the kind where everything drags on longer than it should. Cold air, barely any sleep, and mud everywhere. By the end of it, everyone looked wrecked. We had a short break, 10 minutes, maybe less. Most of the guys just dropped wherever they could. I sat down on the ground, elbows on my knees, trying to slow my breathing. Elias came over a second later and dropped down beside me. "Still alive?" he asked. "Barely," I muttered. He let out a quiet laugh, then leaned back on his hands, looking up at the sky like we weren't in the middle of nowhere covered in dirt. For a few seconds neither of us said anything. Then I felt it. His hand brushing against mine. At first, I thought it was accidental. It made sense, we were sitting close, gear everywhere, not much space. But then his fingers didn't move away. They stayed there. Light. Barely touching. But enough. My chest tightened instantly. I didn't look at him, I couldn't. I just stared straight ahead, like if I ignored it, it wouldn't be real. But it was. And then, his fingers shifted slightly. Not grabbing. Not obvious. Just there. Like he was testing it. Testing me. My brain was going a mile a minute, trying to figure out what to do. Pull away? Say something? Pretend I didn't notice? Instead, I did nothing. And that was the moment everything changed. Because I didn't pull away. After a few seconds, he finally moved his hand like nothing happened, pushing himself up to stand. "Break's over," he said, casual as ever. I nodded, even though my heart was still racing. The rest of that day felt different. Not on the outside, everything looked the same. Same drills, same yelling, same routine. But between us? Something had shifted. It showed up in small ways. The way he looked at me sometimes, holding eye contact just a second too long. The way he'd stand closer than necessary, like space didn't matter anymore. The way his voice dropped when he said my name. And the worst part? I started responding to it. A brush of shoulders that lingered. A joke that felt a little too personal. Moments that could still be explained away, but only barely. I kept telling myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. Because if it wasn't, then I had no idea what to do with it. A few nights later, things got worse. Or better. I still don't know. We were back in the barracks, lights out, everyone settling in after another long day. The room was quiet except for the usual shifting, the occasional cough, someone snoring already. Elias was in the bunk next to mine. I was lying on my back, staring up at the ceiling, trying to shut my brain off. Didn't work. All I could think about was that moment earlier. His hand. The way he didn't move. The way I didn't either. I turned onto my side, facing the wall, trying to force myself to sleep. Then I felt it again. A light tap against my arm. I froze. Another tap. I slowly turned my head. Elias was leaning slightly over from his bunk, close enough that I could see his face even in the low light. "You awake?" he whispered. I hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Yeah." He didn't say anything right away. Just looked at me. There was something different in his expression. Not the usual relaxed confidence. Something more uncertain. Like he wasn't sure how far to go. That should have been my cue to shut it down. Instead, I whispered, "What's up?" He exhaled quietly, glancing around to make sure nobody was paying attention. Then his eyes went back to mine. "You felt that earlier, right?" My stomach dropped. Straight to the point. No pretending. No way out. I swallowed, my voice coming out lower than I expected. "Yeah." Silence. Heavy. Thick. "Okay," he said after a second, almost like he just needed confirmation. And that was it. No explanation. No backtracking. Just that one word. But somehow, it said everything. I should have turned away. I should have told him it didn't mean anything. Instead, I stayed right there, looking at him, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone else would hear it. And then he did something that made it impossible to go back. He moved closer. Not all the way. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But enough that I could feel his presence right there, inches away. "Harvey!" He started, then stopped. I waited. Every part of me tense. "What?" I whispered. He hesitated again, like he was choosing his next move carefully. Then, quietly, "Tell me to stop." My breath caught. Because I knew exactly what he meant. And the truth? I didn't want him to. Not even a little. So I didn't say anything. And that silence? That was all the answer he needed. I don't know what I expected him to do after that. Maybe laugh it off. Maybe pull back and pretend he hadn't said anything. Give us both an out. He didn't. That silence between us stretched for maybe a second, maybe longer. It felt like time slowed down just enough for me to realize there was still a way to stop this. All I had to do was say one word. I didn't. Elias let out a quiet breath, like he'd been holding it in, then shifted just a little closer. Not enough to draw attention, but enough that I could feel the heat coming off him. My entire body tensed. "Okay," he murmured, almost to himself. Then his hand found mine again. This time, there was no pretending it was accidental. His fingers slid against mine, slower than before, deliberate. Testing, but more confident now. I inhaled sharply, my chest tightening. Still. I didn't move. Didn't pull away. Didn't say a word. And that was it. That was the point of no return. He adjusted slightly in his bunk, leaning closer so his arm rested against mine. It should have felt cramped, awkward, but it didn't. It felt right. Like we'd both been heading here without admitting it. "You're not saying anything," he whispered. There was a hint of something in his voice. Not doubt exactly, more like he was making sure I was still there with him. "I told you to stop," I whispered back, my voice barely steady. He let out the smallest huff of a laugh, low and quiet. "Yeah," he said. "You did." But he didn't move his hand. Neither did I. The room around us was still. Too still. Every little sound felt louder, the shifting of sheets, someone turning in their sleep across the room. It made everything we were doing feel sharper, more real. Like we were getting away with something we shouldn't. Elias's thumb brushed lightly over my knuckles. That tiny movement sent a jolt through me. Way stronger than it should have. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my breathing even. "You sure about this?" he asked softly. That question hit differently. It wasn't teasing anymore. It wasn't casual. It was real. I turned my head slightly, just enough to look at him properly. Even in the low light, I could see the way he was watching me, focused, careful, like he didn't want to push too far. That mattered more than I expected. "Are you?" I asked back. He didn't hesitate this time. "Yeah." Something in my chest settled at that. Not completely, but enough. I nodded once, even though he probably didn't need it. Then yeah. That was all it took. His fingers tightened around mine, still not obvious, still subtle, but firmer now. Like he wasn't second-guessing it anymore. And neither was I. After that night, things didn't go back to normal. They couldn't. But they didn't explode into something obvious either. If anything, it got quieter. More controlled. Like we both understood the risk without needing to say it out loud. During the day, nothing really changed, at least, not on the surface. We still trained, still followed orders, still acted like everyone else. But underneath? Every interaction felt different. Charged. A look held too long. A shoulder bump that lingered. The way his hand would briefly press against my back when we moved past each other, just for a second longer than necessary. No one else seemed to notice. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. But I noticed. Every time. And it started getting harder to ignore how much I wanted those moments. A week later, we were assigned to a night exercise. Paired up again. Of course. We were posted up behind cover, keeping low, waiting for the signal to move. It was dark, the kind of dark where everything feels closer than it is. Elias was right next to me, close enough that our shoulders were pressed together. "Stay sharp," he muttered, but his tone was different. "Lighter." "Always am," I whispered back. He shifted slightly, turning his head just enough that his voice dropped lower. "You're distracted." I let out a quiet breath. "I am not," he huffed softly. "You are." I glanced at him, barely able to make out his expression. "You're the one talking." "Yeah," he said. "To you." That shouldn't have hit as hard as it did. I looked away, focusing forward again, but I could feel it, that pull. The same one from before, only stronger now. Like whatever this was, it wasn't staying contained. A few seconds passed. Then I felt it again. His hand brushing against mine. This time, I didn't hesitate. I turned my hand slightly, just enough to meet his. And for a moment, in the middle of everything, orders, tension, the constant pressure, it felt like the rest of the world dropped away. Just for a second. Just long enough to realize something I probably should have figured out sooner. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It wasn't just tension. It was something deeper. Something that was starting to matter a lot more than it should have. And that was where things got dangerous. Because feelings like that don't stay hidden forever. No matter how careful you think you're being. It almost slipped. Not in some dramatic way. No one caught us outright, no accusations, nothing like that. But it got close enough that I felt it in my chest for hours after. And Elias did too. It started during drills. We were running the same exercise over and over, movement, cover, communication. Everything had to be tight, precise. No room for mistakes. Elias and I were paired again. At this point, it didn't even feel like coincidence anymore. We moved together easily, like we'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. No hesitation, no second guessing. Just instinct. At one point, we ended up pressed behind the same barrier, waiting for the signal. Too close. Way too close. His arm was braced right next to mine, his body angled slightly into me. I could feel his breathing, steady, controlled, but deeper than usual. "Harvey," he said quietly. "Yeah? You're doing it again." I frowned slightly. "Doing what?" "Thinking too much." I almost rolled my eyes, but before I could respond, his hand brushed against my side. Not quick. Not accidental. It lingered. Just for a second too long. And that was the problem. Because someone noticed. "Yo!" a voice called out from a few feet away. We both froze instantly. I turned my head and saw one of the guys, Miller, watching us with a raised eyebrow. Not suspicious exactly, but not clueless either. "You too good?" he asked. Elias didn't miss a beat. "Yeah." "Why?" Miller shrugged. "Looked like you forgot where you were for a second." There was a pause. A dangerous one. I forced a quick scoff. "We're fine. Focus on your own position." He held my gaze for a second longer than I liked, then smirked slightly. "Relax, man. Just saying." Then he turned away. But the damage was done. The rest of the drill, I couldn't focus. Not properly. Every movement felt off. Too aware. Too careful. And Elias? He didn't touch me again. Not once. Later that night, back in the barracks, the tension between us was different. Not gone. Just heavier. I was sitting on the edge of my bunk, messing with my gear, pretending I wasn't replaying that moment over and over in my head. Elias walked in a minute later. Our eyes met briefly. That was enough. "Outside," he muttered under his breath. Then he kept walking like nothing happened. I waited a few seconds before following. The air outside was colder than I expected. Or maybe that was just me. Elias was already there, pacing slightly before stopping when he saw me. "That was close," he said immediately. "Yeah," I replied. "Too close." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "We can't be that careless." I know. The frustration in his voice matched mine. But underneath it, there was something else. Something neither of us was saying. I leaned back against the wall, crossing my arms. Maybe we should just. Don't, he cut in. I blinked. Don't what? Don't say we should stop. I held his gaze. I was gonna say we should be smarter. He hesitated, then let out a quiet breath. Yeah, he said. That too. For a second, either of us moved. Then he stepped closer. Not rushed. Not impulsive. Careful. Like he was fully aware of every inch between us. We just need to keep it under control, he said, quieter now. I nodded slowly. We can do that. Another step closer. Now he was right in front of me. Can we? He asked. That question hit harder than it should have. Because I wasn't sure anymore. I should have said yes immediately. Instead, I hesitated. And that hesitation? He noticed. Elias studied my face for a second, then let out a small, almost amused breath. Yeah, he murmured. That's what I thought. What's that supposed to mean? I asked. It means. He paused, searching for the right words. This isn't just something we can switch off whenever it gets inconvenient. I didn't respond right away. Because he was right. And we both knew it. The silence stretched between us again. But this time, it wasn't uncertain. It was charged. Elias's gaze dropped briefly to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. Subtle. But not subtle enough. My pulse kicked up instantly. You ever think about how bad of an idea this is? I asked quietly. Yeah, he said. And? He didn't hesitate. Still here. That did something to me. Something I probably should have fought harder. But I didn't. I stayed exactly where I was. Right in front of him. Close enough that if either of us moved just a little. Harvey, he said softer now. Yeah? Tell me to stop. Again. Same words. Same weight behind them. And just like before. I didn't say it. I couldn't. So instead I shook my head once. Barely. But enough. And that was all it took. Elias closed the distance. Not rushed. Not reckless. Just inevitable. And the second it happened, I knew there was no going back after this. Not to how things were before. Not even close. The first thing I noticed was how still everything felt. Not quiet, because the base was never really quiet, but distant. Like the moment we crossed that line, everything else faded just enough to stop mattering. Elias didn't rush it. That's what got me. He moved like he was giving me time to pull away, even though we both knew I wasn't going to. When his lips met mine, it wasn't messy or desperate. It was careful. Like he'd been thinking about it longer than he wanted to admit. For a second, I didn't react. My brain just stalled. Then it hit me all at once. The weight of it. The fact that this was real. My hand came up almost instinctively, gripping the front of his shirt, not pushing him away, just holding on. That was all the encouragement he needed. The kiss deepened slightly, still controlled but not hesitant anymore. Like that last bit of doubt had finally disappeared. And yeah, I kissed him back. There was no point pretending otherwise. We didn't stay like that long. Not because we didn't want to. Because we couldn't. Elias pulled back first, just enough to create space between us, both of us breathing a little heavier than we should have been. Neither of us spoke immediately. We just looked at each other. And there it was. That shift. Whatever this had been before, tension, curiosity, whatever you want to call it, it wasn't that anymore. This was real now. And that made everything more complicated. Yeah, Elias muttered under his breath, almost like he was confirming something to himself. I let out a short breath, running a hand through my hair. Yeah. Great conversation. But honestly, there wasn't much else to say. What do you even say after that? He stepped back first. Not far. Just enough to put a little distance between us again. "We can't do that again out here," he said, more grounded now. I nodded. "No shit." But neither of us sounded like we actually meant never again. Just, not here. Not like that. He glanced around quickly, like reality was finally settling back in. "Come on," he said. "We should head back before someone notices." "Yeah." We walked back in separately. Not together. That part didn't need to be discussed. Back inside, everything felt normal. Too normal. Guys talking, laughing, someone complaining about the next day's schedule. Same as always. But for me, nothing felt the same. I could still feel it. That moment. The way it shifted something in my chest that I hadn't been ready to deal with. I kept my head down, focusing on anything that wasn't Elias. Didn't work. I was hyper-aware of where he was in the room without even looking. The sound of his voice. The way he moved. It was like my brain had locked onto him and refused to let go. That night was worse. Way worse. Because now there was history. Now there was something real sitting between us. I lay in my bunk, staring up at the ceiling again, except this time there was no pretending I didn't know what was going on. I heard movement next to me. "Harvey!" His voice. Low. Quiet. I turned my head. Elias was already looking at me. No hesitation this time. "You good?" he asked. I let out a breath. "Yeah." "You?" He shrugged slightly. "Yeah." Pause. Then softer. "Worth it?" That caught me off guard. I held his gaze for a second. Thought about it. Everything, the risk, how close we'd already gotten to being noticed, how messy this could get. Then I said honestly, "Yeah." Something in his expression shifted at that. Not relief exactly. More like confirmation. "Yeah," he repeated quietly. We didn't touch that night. Not even a little. But somehow, it felt more intense than before. Because now we both knew exactly what we were holding back. And how hard it was getting to hold it back at all. Over the next few days, things got complicated. Not in an obvious way. On the outside, we were even more careful than before. If anything, we looked less close. Less obvious. No unnecessary contact. No lingering moments. Nothing that anyone could question. But underneath? It was worse than ever. Because now every look meant more. Every second alone, even if it was just a few minutes, felt heavier. Like we were constantly walking right up to the line. And forcing ourselves not to cross it again. Until one night. We didn't stop ourselves. It was late. Most of the guys were already asleep. I was sitting on my bunk, pretending to read something I hadn't actually processed in 10 minutes. Elias stood up from his, stretching slightly. Then he looked at me. Just for a second. That was it. But it was enough. "Outside," he mouthed. Again. Same as before. Except this time. There was no hesitation. The second we were out there, the distance disappeared. No pacing. No overthinking. Elias stepped in close, his hand grabbing the front of my shirt and pulling me toward him. And this time, there was nothing careful about it. The difference this time wasn't just the way he moved. It was everything behind it. There was no hesitation anymore. No testing, no waiting to see if I'd pull away. Elias already knew I wouldn't. And the truth? I knew the same about him. When he pulled me in, it wasn't rushed, but it wasn't careful either. It felt certain. Like whatever line we'd been dancing around before had finally snapped. I grabbed onto him just as fast, like my body had already decided before my brain could catch up. And yeah, this time, it hit harder. Not just the moment itself, but everything behind it. All the tension from the past weeks, every look, every almost touch, every second we'd held back, it all came crashing in at once. It wasn't just physical anymore. Not even close. When we finally pulled back, it wasn't because we wanted to. It was because we had to. Same as before. But this time, the space between us felt different. He didn't step away right away. Neither did I. We were still close, still caught in that moment. Both of us breathing heavier than we should have been. Elias looked at me like he was trying to figure something out. Okay, he said quietly. I let out a short breath. Okay, what? He shook his head slightly, like he didn't fully have the words. This is more than I thought it was gonna be. That landed harder than anything else so far. Because I'd been thinking the same thing. I just hadn't said it. Yeah, I admitted. There was no point pretending anymore. For a second, either of us spoke. Then he ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. This is where it gets complicated, he said. I almost laughed. You think? He gave me a look, not annoyed, just real. I'm serious, Harvey. I know. And I did. That was the problem. He leaned back slightly, putting just enough distance between us to think clearly. People are already starting to notice little things, he continued. We can't afford to mess this up. I know, I repeated. But even as I said it, I could feel the conflict sitting right there in my chest. Because knowing it didn't change how I felt. Didn't make it easier to pull back. Elias watched me for a second, like he could read that. Tell me you can keep this under control, he said. That question again. Except now it felt heavier. More real. I hesitated. And that hesitation? It said everything. He let out a quiet breath, looking down for a second before meeting my eyes again. Yeah, he murmured. That's what I thought. Don't, I said quickly. Don't what? Don't act like I'm the only one feeling this. His jaw tightened slightly. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. That tension between us shifted again, not bad, just honest. Finally, Elias stepped closer again, slower this time. Look, he said, voice lower, steadier. I'm not saying we stop. That surprised me more than anything. But we need to be smart, he added. No slipping. No moments like earlier today. We keep it contained. I held his gaze. And if we can't? I asked. He didn't answer right away. And that? That told me everything. The silence stretched. Then he said quietly, we figure it out. Not a perfect answer. Not a clean one. But it was real. And for some reason, that was enough. After that, things changed again. Not in the obvious way people expect. We didn't suddenly get reckless. If anything, we got better at hiding it. More controlled. More aware. But underneath? It kept growing. Stronger. Harder to ignore. Because now it wasn't just about the moments we stole when no one was looking. It was about everything in between. The way he'd look at me across the room without saying a word, and I'd know exactly what he meant. The way just standing next to him felt different now. Heavier. Familiar. The way I started thinking about him even when he wasn't there. And that was the part one didn't expect. One night, a few days later, we were on watch together. Just the two of us. Quiet. Dark. No distractions. We stood side by side, scanning the perimeter like we were supposed to. But neither of us was really focused on that. You ever think about after this? Elias asked suddenly. I glanced at him. After what? All of it. Training. Deployment. Whatever comes next. I shrugged slightly. Haven't really thought that far. That's a lie. I smirked a little. Okay, maybe a little. He nodded like he expected that. Yeah, he said. Me too. There was a pause. Then quieter. You in it for the long haul? I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He hesitated. Just for a second. Then, I mean, do you see yourself staying? Or getting out when you can? Something about the way he asked felt like there was more behind it. I don't know, I admitted. Depends how things go, I guess. He nodded slowly. But he didn't look away this time. Yeah, he said. Same. Another pause. Then he added, almost under his breath, guess some things make that decision harder. My chest tightened at that. Because I knew exactly what he meant. And this time? Neither of us tried to pretend otherwise. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't temporary. It wasn't just something happening because of where we were. Elias wasn't just part of the situation. He was becoming something a lot more permanent than that. And that realization? It was a lot heavier than anything we'd done so far. Because feelings like that, they don't stay simple. Not in a place like that. Not under that kind of pressure. It didn't hit me all at once. It crept in slowly, through small moments that didn't seem important until they stacked up. Like the way Elias would look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Not quick glances anymore. Not something you could brush off. It was steady. Real. Or the way silence between us stopped feeling empty. We didn't always need to talk. Just standing there, side by side, felt like enough. That wasn't normal. Not for this place. The shift became impossible to ignore the night everything almost fell apart. We were back on another late assignment, running drills with a different group this time. New people. Less familiarity. Which meant less room for mistakes. I knew that. Elias knew that. But something felt off from the start. He was quieter than usual. More focused, but not in a good way. Tense. You good? I asked at one point when we had a second alone. Yeah, he said quickly. Too quickly. I didn't push it. Not there. But I didn't stop noticing either. It finally snapped later that night. We were mid-exercise, moving through a routine we'd done a dozen times before. Simple. Controlled. Except this time. Elias messed up. Nothing huge. Just a slight delay, a miscue. But in a place like that, that's all it takes. The instructor caught it immediately. Elias! What the hell was that? He barked. Everything stopped. All eyes on him. And for the first time since I'd met him, Elias didn't have a smooth recovery. He hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Get your head in the game! The instructor snapped. Yes, sir. Elias responded, voice steady, but I could hear it. That edge. The rest of the exercise he was locked in. Too locked in. Like he was overcorrecting. And I knew why. I just didn't want to admit it. Later, when everything wrapped up, he didn't stick around. Didn't talk. Didn't even look at me. He just walked off. That's when I knew something was really wrong. I found him outside, same place as always. Leaning against the wall, arms crossed, staring off like he was trying to outrun his own thoughts. Hey, I said, stepping up beside him. No response. Elias. He exhaled sharply. What? That caught me off guard. Not the words, the tone. Talk to me, I said. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. There's nothing to talk about. That's not true. He turned to look at me then, something frustrated sitting right under the surface. This, he gestured between us, not loudly, but enough. This is getting in my head. There it was. Out in the open. I felt it land in my chest immediately. You messed up one drill, I said. That's it. That's not it, he shot back. The frustration in his voice wasn't about the drill. Not really. It's everything, he added, quieter now. I'm thinking about you when I shouldn't be. I'm distracted when I can't afford to be. That hit harder. Because I couldn't argue with it. I'd been feeling the same thing. I just hadn't said it out loud. For a second, either of us spoke. Then I said, So what are you saying? He looked at me like he was trying to figure that out himself. I'm saying. He paused, jaw tightening slightly. I don't want to screw this up. Any of it. This, I repeated, nodding between us. And everything else, he added. I nodded slowly. Yeah. Because I got it. I really did. The silence stretched again. But this time, it felt heavier than before. Not tension. Not uncertainty. Something closer to a decision. Elias looked down for a second, then back at me. We need to figure out what this is, he said. I let out a quiet breath. You think putting a label on it's gonna make it easier? No, he admitted. But pretending it's nothing isn't working either. Fair point. I leaned back against the wall beside him, staring out into the dark. So what is it? I asked. He didn't answer right away. And for once, either did I. Because the truth? We both already knew. After a long moment, he said it. Quiet. Clear. It's not just physical. I nodded. Yeah. No point denying that anymore. I care about you, he added. That one landed differently. Not heavy in a bad way. Just real. Honest. And impossible to ignore. I turned my head slightly, looking at him. Yeah, I said. I know. Then, after a second, I care about you too. No hesitation this time. No second guessing. Just the truth. Something in his expression softened at that. Not relief exactly. More like confirmation. Like he needed to hear it said out loud. So what do we do? I asked. That was the real question. And for once, he actually had an answer. We stop acting like this is something we can just shut off whenever it's inconvenient, he said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That sounds risky. He let out a small breath. It is. Then why? Because I'd rather deal with that, he cut in, than pretend this doesn't matter. That shut me up. Because yeah? Same. I nodded slowly. Okay. He studied my face for a second. Okay? He repeated. Yeah, I said. Okay. Not perfect. Not safe. But honest. And somehow, that felt more solid than anything we'd had before. We didn't need to say anything else after that. For the first time since this started, it felt like we were actually on the same page. No guessing. No avoiding it. Just real. And weirdly, that made everything feel a little less complicated. Not easier, but clearer. Because now it wasn't just something happening between us. It was something we were choosing. Together. After that night, something settled between us. Not the tension, that was still there. Not the risk, that definitely didn't go anywhere. But the confusion? That part finally eased. Because now we weren't pretending anymore. We didn't suddenly start acting different in front of everyone. If anything, we got even better at blending in. Same routines. Same interactions. Same controlled distance when it mattered. But underneath? Everything felt steadier. Like we weren't constantly second-guessing every moment anymore. We knew what this was. And more importantly, we knew we were both in it. It showed up in small ways. The kind no one else would ever notice. A glance across the room that lasted just a second longer, but said everything. A quiet, "You good?" that meant more than just the words. The way standing next to him didn't feel tense anymore, just right. A few weeks later, things started shifting again. Training was wrapping up. People were getting assignments, talking about where they'd end up next. Some were excited. Some weren't. I hadn't really thought about it too much. Not until Elias brought it up. We were sitting outside again, same spot, like always. It had kind of become ours without either of us saying it. They posted the assignments, he said. I glanced at him. Yeah, I saw. He nodded slowly. Then, you check yours? Not yet. That wasn't entirely true. I just hadn't processed it. He studied me for a second. You should. I let out a breath. You gonna tell me yours or just make this dramatic? A small smirk pulled at his mouth. Same unit. I blinked. What? Same unit, he repeated, more clearly this time. For a second, I just stared at him. Then I shook my head slightly, letting out a quiet laugh. No way. Way. Something in my chest lifted before I could stop it. Guess we got lucky, I said. Elias looked at me for a second longer than usual. Yeah, he said quietly. Guess we did. But there was something more in the way he said it. Not just luck. Something that felt intentional. I didn't question it. Didn't need to. That night felt different. Not intense. Not overwhelming. Just calm. Like for the first time since all of this started, we weren't waiting for something to go wrong. We were just there. Together. Later, when things had quieted down, we ended up outside again. No reason. Just habit at this point. I leaned back against the wall, glancing over at him. You ever think this would happen? I asked. He huffed softly. In the army? Yeah. He shook his head. Not even a little. Same. There was a pause. Then he added. Wouldn't change it though. That got my attention. I looked at him. You sure about that? He didn't hesitate. Yeah. Simple. Direct. Real. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. Me either. We stood there for a while after that, not saying much. Didn't need to. At some point, his shoulder bumped lightly against mine. This time, either of us moved away. And that's the thing about all of it. It didn't start the way you'd expect. No big moment. No instant connection. Just small things. A look. A touch. A moment that lasted a second too long. But somehow, all those small things added up to something bigger than either of us planned for. Something real. I joined the army expecting structure. Discipline. Maybe a sense of direction. I didn't expect to find someone who'd change the way everything felt. But I did. And yeah, it wasn't easy. It probably never would be. But standing there next to Elias, knowing we were walking into whatever came next together, that felt worth it. More than worth it. I didn't expect to fall in love in the army. But looking back, I don't think there was ever a version of this where I didn't. And honestly, I wouldn't change a single part of it.